What's up? This is Rebel Radio.
What up, what up? This is DJ Newmark.
This is Peanut Butter Wolf.
It's your boy. It's okay.
Keep checking out Rebel Radio.
Rebel Radio.
This is Rebel Radio.
We're in the place right here. Rebel Radio is going down.
Would you say Rebel Radio?
Oh, wait. Let's do it again.
Rebel Radio.
What's up, Rebels? Welcome back to Rebel Radio, the weekly show where I bring you the rebels who are shaping our culture. I'm your host, Josh Levine. Man, it's that rare rainy day in Los Angeles. I'm feeling that rainy day energy. And today's guest, he makes the kind of music that just makes the sun come out. If it's cold and shitty where you are, you definitely want to put on some Mark de Clive-Lowe. Mark is a DJ, musician, songwriter, blending jazz, soul, hip-hop, house, sounds from around the world. If you haven't seen his live remixes, you definitely want to check that out on YouTube or on his website. If you haven't been to his party church, you're going to have to wait until after the pandemic, but it's the place to be. Mark's got some great stories for us about the cultural differences that affect his music, not only his own background, coming from New Zealand and his Japanese heritage, but also just playing around the world and how that affects what he plays on stage, the music that he makes. He gives some thoughts on what's wrong with Mark Geiger buying up music venues right now during this pandemic. Some interesting thoughts on that, and his philosophy or his strategy about collaboration and community that guides everything he does. It's a really good interview, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. Let's get into it right now. Well, man, thank you for making time to do this.
Thanks for reaching out. It's cool, man.
Nah, it's great. I've been following you, maybe from the beginning, and finally have a chance to dig into it a little bit and talk about, the journey and what you're up to next and all that stuff.
Nice, man. I dig it.
If you don't mind, I always like to go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, do you remember the first record you ever bought?
I remember the first cassette tape I bought, for sure.
Okay.
So, I grew up in New Zealand and had two older brothers. And so there were a few hand-me-down albums, for sure. And they were pretty influential as far as, when you're, 6 years old or 7 years old, you're given something like that. But then when I was 10, I went to Japan for the first time. My mom's Japanese, so I was meeting family, and it was the start of kind of annual trips. And so this is 1984. So the Walkman is king of the hill, right?
For sure.
So I get there. My uncle Takaji, he's like, "Oh, you don't have a Walkman? We gotta go get one right now." So he took me out to Akihabara, which is like they call it Electric City. Like every shop is electronics there in Tokyo. And so we go to Akihabara, and he buys me a Walkman. I was like, "Well, I better get something to put in it." And so I literally grabbed I was 10 years old, grabbed the first two cassette tapes that were there, kind of thing.
Okay.
One was the best of the Beatles. Like I think it was some kind of, unofficial best of, but it was, but
sure.
that was killer. And the other one was it had just come out, was Like a Virgin, Madonna.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I was 10 years old in Tokyo, and those two were the soundtrack for that trip.
That's so funny.
Right? Shit, Pettibone.
I mean, it's funny. I mean, first of all, two amazing records to start with.
Yeah.
And it's so funny how, those, music has that power to bring us to those moments.
Oh my God, yeah. Absolutely, man.
And so we associate them with time and place and,
exactly.
and the smells and sights and all that around us.
Exactly. So, for me, as much as the, the artist path I've been on and forged, as much as that's the antithesis to Like a Virgin, I can't help but give it up to that record. That cassette tape was soundtrack to the first trip to Japan,
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting after that, just on the getting music tip, growing up in New Zealand, obviously pre-internet, the things which, before in between listening to what my brothers listened to and finding my own taste, what would fill that would be the local music media.
Sure.
And so this interesting filtration of UK music, US music, and and some New Zealand and Australian music. At that time, I didn't know which was which. Like, it's just music. Like, I didn't like. There were some New Zealand bands. I was shocked a couple of years later to learn, wow, they're actually from New Zealand. They're not English or American or whatever. So I didn't have that discernment. But that would mean whatever was the big record would get through because it's New Zealand. Right. And then we had a thing where it was the lowest number of units to go gold of any kind of major country in the world. So the majors would often experiment with that. Like Portishead went gold in New Zealand first. Oh, wow. And then because it was, I presume it was on through, Universal or Sony or one of the bigs, right? Right. So they would have been like at head office, well, look, we're gold in this one territory, so let's get gold everywhere else. Yeah, so we had this kind of interesting little kind of testing ground for stuff there. Sure.
And it is so interesting when you see, when you travel the world, as I'm sure you do, and you see what artists are big in different places. Right. And a lot of times, we take it for granted here in LA or in the States or London or, right, because we have access to all music at all times, right? Of course, and yeah. Every artist comes through here, no matter what. But then, you go to these other countries and it's like, the artists, they toured through this place that doesn't get artists. For sure. And then they just love them for life.
Absolutely, man. Seen so much of that go down. And even now, when I remember a few years back, I was thinking, the internet has globalized the music village. Like if something is big somewhere, it's big everywhere, even relatively speaking in niches or mainstream or whatever. Sure. And then touring, I just really noticed it's not the case at all. Music's still very local in taste. Even if you're in Slovenia, you can access whatever you want to, but the shit that's going to filter into your surroundings that you're going to want to check for it is going to be quite idiosyncratic to where you are. Sure. So I think I was looking at the digital music culture through rose-colored glasses for a minute there. Yeah, I get it. But it's good though, because then different places have their own flavor. It's not right. It's not like in London walking down the high street and it's the same shops on every high street because it's all fully globalized corporations. Music still seems free of that, which is amazing. It's great.
Yeah, I think we're still coming to terms with how the landscape keeps changing, right? Yeah. And as much as we have more access, there's more content, right? And
totally.
And there's, when we were coming up, like I think you either lived in this one subculture and didn't know the rest. Right. Or you kind of like, you sort of dabbled but it took work to dive deeper.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right. And so like, for me, like, I was into hip hop, I was into dance music, I was into, reggae, and like, those are three different stores in different neighborhoods.
Oh my God. Totally.
Right. Yeah. And so that's a whole day of like, trying to get from one place to another and find the right shit. And
that was in the Bay, yeah?
Yeah.
See, and so that's really interesting to hear, because if I think of that compared to New Zealand, like, country then of 3 million, I was in a city of 1.5 million, right? Pre-internet, blah, blah, blah. And it's the same thing. And it's interesting hearing you say that from a perspective of being in the Bay, like in a much bigger place. But I remember, like, for me, there was one morning at school, like in 1989, and all my friends would listen to like the Pixies and like guitar music, which just didn't resonate with me. Yeah. And then one of my friends walks up to me. He was like he's Tongan from the Pacific Islands, and walks up to me, has his Walkman, puts it on my head, and it was the first Guy album. And that just fucking blew I'd never heard anything like it. Like,
yeah, there was nothing like it.
There was, but it comes from a lineage of reference points that I'd never even heard. Like I'd heard 20s and 30s jazz through my dad, but I was missing the 60s and 70s cultural revolution because he lived in Japan that whole time, and he was immersed in that world, post-war Japan. Yeah. And so what I got to experience through his record collection skipped that didn't exist. Yeah. And so that led me to like straight into native tongues hip hop, and I didn't understand sampling at all, but I knew that I listened to all this music. I was like, I want to be Teddy Riley. So like, I got a keyboard and a drum machine. I didn't know what I was doing.
Amazing.
But there came a point, like I ended up, that was actually an early precursor to production, like getting together with, like having a couple of bands with friends and making demo tapes and stuff. But there was a day I woke up and I just I did a full 180. I was like, nah, fuck these loops, fuck all this stuff. I want to get into into the jazz shit, because I grew up playing piano. I was like, I just me, the piano, a Miles record, a Coltrane record, a Bramford record kind of thing. And the way you're talking about this before, how it's so hard to jump from things, like that jump for me in like, I guess 92 or 93, around then, into jazz, as far as a passionate focus, like kind of irrationally passionate focus, it meant that from that point up to about 96 maybe, I didn't listen to any hip hop. Like I completely fucking missed major artists, like major artists. But before that, I was like, it was Brand Nubian, Digital Underground, Third Base, Tribe, De La, that was JB's, that was that time.
Sure.
But then this full pivot meant, and you alluded to it as a listener, but also as an aspiring, professional musician, it's like there's no space to,
right.
If I'm diving into this world where it's like, oh my God, I just want to be able to, do what Herbie does or something, then then I hear someone mentioning Nas or whatever, but I'd be like, I don't have, it's not even, I don't have bandwidth.
Yeah.
So it's interesting coming back to mid-90s hip hop later as an adult.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. I was like, I miss a lot of dope shit, but I can still hear it now. And
sure.
And as far as the musicality and the production, I felt like there was fighting words. I thought there was more richness in the earlier 90s stuff. More soulfulness. And just for my for my musical taste, that was like, okay, so I connected with it deeply at a time when it resonated a lot. And then I hear the mid-90s stuff that I missed. I'm like, yeah, production's cool. It's all, but there weren't many records which changed my way of hearing stuff. Like, the way that the first time I heard, the Obama Rush the Show, from a production perspective, I'm like, what the fuck is that? The first De La Soul record, just things which they were paradigm shifting in a lot of ways.
So how much do you think that, music, I think is a reaction, right? Like
totally,
musicians are products of their environment, right? And so I feel like as a musician, which I'm not, but you're either trying to innovate against something that that's the prevailing sound of the time or whatever's influencing you, or I don't want to say trying to copy because that sounds more negative, but like you're either falling in or you're working against, right? Totally. So to me, like, you're talking about that era, and it's like, Wu-Tang, Gangstar, the Duck Down stuff, like, Smith & Wesson, like what they did was like they stripped out a lot of the musicality that was in the generation before them. Yeah. Right. So that was their way of being different and establishing their own thing.
Yeah. I totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's always these ebbs and flows. Right. And, in the same way that glam rock or, that the hair bands got, grunge, right? Who didn't want to be part of that, right?
Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So wait, back to something you were saying earlier, this understanding about, you have such a global perspective because of how you grew up. And so that understanding about how different markets, really pick up on different artists. Do you use that now? Is that like part of your strategy for your own career?
The current situation, the COVID thing has made me think about it a lot. And
sure,
I've been on tour literally nonstop for 20 years.
Yeah.
Last time I was in one place this long was 1999.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. It's kind of got its own beauty to it, and gives me a lot of perspective on different parts of the world. And like, if I'm traveling somewhere, like I would casually go on 12-hour flights. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, it's a gig there. It's 12 hours away. Cool. Maybe I'll pick up some more gigs and it'll be a tour. Or, you know, South Africa wants me for one show and it's 30 hours to get there. Cool. You know,
sure.
That was part of the attraction, I guess, too. It's a lifestyle, most definitely. But not in a glamorous way. Like, ironically, it's still schlepping a whole lot of gear, being in economy class all the time, you know, meeting promoters for one day for the first time, then never again. It's weird shit.
Sure.
But kind of, I'm talking around it, but to your question. So there are definitely places I've been to where I've connected more, and audiences have connected more as well. Mm-hmm. You know, Japan is the first one. Like, it's obvious for me, being half Japanese and having grown up there and gone to high school there, and they've always been huge supporters. But there's also something in the audience there where, especially in club music, and I think K-pop actually has a parallel to this. There's an appreciation for a certain musical sensibility that allows for more music in the music, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Japan was like that with jazz back in the day. It's like, you know, that's why there's all these albums like, you know, Miles in Japan, Coltrane in Japan, you know, whoever. And
sure.
So they love that shit. So I love the depth of committed passion that the Japanese have to things that they love. Mm-hmm. And as a culture, they appreciate craftsmanship and the craft.
Absolutely.
And so those are things that are very important to me in what I do. And it's oftentimes there's a point where I don't care if someone recognizes it or not. Like, I'll have all my shit and do like a solo live production remix set in a dance floor club. And I'm making the shit from scratch in real time as it happens. If I don't do anything, nothing changes.
Right.
Like, and then after someone's like, "Oh man, dope DJ set." And
sure.
so they don't recognize what just happened. But there's a flip side compliment to that. It's like, "Oh, that shit was so together. I thought you were DJing."
Absolutely.
But the Japanese, I feel like, and some other countries, but there's that appreciation of craftsmanship as well as love and passion for the music. It combines in this kind of this wholeness where they can get down and appreciate the idiosyncrasies and subtleties too.
Yeah.
So I love that there. So Japan's one for sure. South Africa, as much as I said it's a long way to go, I went down there and I was, you know, house music is massive there.
Right.
Massive. And I my first time there, I'm like, you know, I'm in South Africa, first time. They fucking love house music. Let's go. And so I'm playing this club in Soweto, peak time on a Friday or Saturday. And I went from the airport basically to the club that was the first gig of the tour. Mm-hmm. And so I went in Europe in peak time, you know, there's a BPM relationship that works. So, you know, in a house club, peak time, you're in the 120s somewhere, and you may end up on up to 130. Like, I'm talking, and you know, it varies from subgenre to subgenre, but that's kind of what I would do at a peak time gig in Europe. And so I went in South Africa and did this, and I could feel that the shit did not connect. And I knew that what I was doing was good, so I didn't understand that disconnection, right? And so then I finish, and Kat gets on after me, who's DJing, spinning records, and he just was chilling in the cut. Like, it was like 110 BPM or something. I was like, oh, what? Yeah. So I'm talking to like the promoter and some people I've met. And like, you know, South Africans don't like to sweat, man. And so the next gig I did, I started at 100 BPM and peaked at 120, which would be where I'd start a regular kind of house music gig.
Yeah.
And they were just in the music so deep. And I realized it was two things. They have a traditional music form called kwaito, And Kwaito and house music have a lot in common, but the tempo is definitely more chill. And then when the tempo is chill, you can hear all the music because it has space to breathe. As soon as you get to conventional house music dance floor tempo, all you really hear is the kick and the hi-hat, or it's like it's just driving it. So then the music becomes secondary to the driving force. So I loved in South Africa, they had this difference. It was like looking at the same thing from a whole different perspective. And it suited me great, because like oftentimes if I'm doing that kind of set, like a dance floor set, sometimes I'll limit or minimize the musicality I put into it, and just make it more about the rhythm and just really drive it. But but in South Africa and like playing in Johannesburg, I was like, cool, I can do whatever I want. I can like play music here, right. So those are two places which have really resonated in, quite specific, idiosyncratic kind of, and culturally paralleled ways to appreciate. And maybe I never thought about that before, but maybe that's what it comes down to, is that there's a traditional cultural kind of root to the experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
So how do you think about that? Obviously, you have, you're from New Zealand, you're part Japanese, you spent time in London, you're here in LA. You have this unique sort of cultural experience, right? And I think, as a creator, your music is always a reflection of who you are and your background and all that, right? And so, like, do you think about accessibility when you're making music?
I feel like if the answer was hell yes, then I'd be in a very different career kind of paradigm.
Sure.
I think I create for myself primarily. Yeah, it's a introspective experience, and the more kind of like there's basically two sides to my coin. One's in the jazz world, one's in the dance floor electronic world, and then there's a spectrum of those two extremes. At any one time, it could be at any one point, and it can kind of organically move between those as well. So depending on the I guess the aesthetic of what the gig is, like if it's a live show, is it a sit down club, is it a dance floor? If I'm making a record, is it like, do I want this to be perceived as a jazz record? Do I want this to be perceived not as a jazz record, but as an electronic record, or whatever it might be? Right. So in those terms, there's some consciousness for sure. But as far as, people will like this. I mean, sure. I personally think that's a bit of a misstep, because I think it's easy to underestimate people. I think people are a lot more surprising than we give them credit for. And then at the same time, I kind of came up, especially in the UK, through a DJ culture that is very different to what I would call a commercial DJ culture. Like there's a kind of DJ gig where if you're booked, you're gonna want to throw in some Tribe and some Stevie and some Michael and some James Brown, and use those tools to capture the crowd. There's another kind of culture and we had this at the Co-op Club in London, where all that got played every party was shit that was made that week. It was, and just as CDR was coming in, cats were still cutting dub plates, get down there on the Saturday afternoon in time for the Sunday party. And so you're hearing what your peers are making in real time. And then being inspired to go back and create more based on what's been created in that moment. So
yeah, that's cool.
So yeah, I related to that more. I'm creating for the music's sake, and the audience, when it's functioning as a dance floor, it's different. But the audience it's a voyeur offering to them. It's like however you want to engage with this, and wherever it takes you, I'm cool with that. But I'm here doing my shit anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I think ultimately, the musicians who try to create for the crowd, that's a big gamble.
Yeah, that can get you a lot of money. I mean,
Yeah.
shit.
I mean,
Like,
but I
it's a
think
whole
like
thing.
you're back to your beginnings, right? You're either Madonna
Uh-huh.
or you're Madonna for a minute.
Right.
More likely, or it fails miserably because you're trying to time the market, and that's
Yeah.
really hard to do, right? Like,
Yeah.
while you're in the studio creating something, culture's moving on.
Culture's never stopping. I mean, I think it's doable at this point in history to a point. Like, there are definitely genres that I think are stable enough that you can do that. And I've had people over the years and recently and 20 years ago be like, man, why don't you do blah, blah, blah? You'd smash that shit.
Uh-huh.
And I'll be like, well, let me try. And the thing is that whatever that blah, blah, blah is, that is a craft, that is a skill.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, it's like if some like a, no, I don't need to get dizzy. But yeah, to say that, like, it would be disrespectful for me to be like, I'm going to make a trap record.
Right.
Like, I love the production sonic of that music, and it does inspire me in different ways, but I kind of filter it and it gets assimilated and comes out where someone may not even know that that's where the inspiration comes from. But if I wanted to get in that game, then, I mean, honestly, if it was me, myself, I just collaborate with someone who produces that shit really well. But if I wanted to do it myself, that would require a lot of, like, study and learning, and really, I feel like that with a lot of like house music or hip hop as well, which is made by people who haven't really spent time assimilating the culture. And which is fine because it comes out of something else. It's like, oh, that's a bit housey or whatever. But I think there's definitely, whether it's, rock, jazz, blues, whatever it is, hip hop, trap, there's a history which is, inherently part of that lineage. And my whole career, I've kind of spent, let me just ride the cracks between everything and see and explore. I love that kind of, interfacing two different worlds, and, like jazz hybridity is a very common thing now, but it really wasn't.
Right.
And so working out how to kind of, round hole, square peg kind of thing. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about, our relationship to jazz, especially in America. Right. And I think, right now we're having this renaissance of jazz influence in popular music.
Right.
With Terrace Martin, Kamasi, what Adrian Young's doing, right? Like there's a bit of a thing happening right now. And I feel like that happens over the years.
Right, in cycles.
And yet, jazz is far, as a genre, it's pretty far away from popular music. Right. But it continues, I guess it keeps finding its way back into culture in really important ways. Right. And
yeah, man.
And there's a lot of, you think of jazz as the original American music, the original black music in America.
Totally.
And so I don't know. I wonder if you have thoughts on what is it about jazz or about us as people that keeps that connection.
Yeah, man.
So strong.
I mean, I think that at the heart of what jazz is improvisation and group improvisation, which is conversation. And I think by nature of that, there's always going to be the kind of boundary breaking, envelope pushing forefront of like the vanguard of the genre. It's been around so long now that we'll always have cocktail jazz, smooth jazz, and whatever else jazz, and like there's definitely it's segmented, but there's definitely also a vanguard pushing it forward, and though that changes, constantly it's changing due to the new generation coming in and new ideas and stuff. So I just think it's inevitable that wave of constant change is going to intersect with pop culture, every seventh wave or whatever, and just and catch a ride. It's interesting with the To Pimp a Butterfly,
right.
That is obviously an amalgamation of these sounds, but also that couldn't have existed without Tribe's records and things that kind of laid the blueprint for the idea of jazz being in hip hop.
Yeah.
And then those records couldn't have happened without Tip growing up, and I'm sure his parents or someone playing these dope ass records, and
sure.
So that it's definitely it's part of that lineage. And it's it's absolutely no question Black American music. The way it's now global, and that music is it's taught, it's learned, it's jammed, and it's melded into local music, local pop music, local underground music, in the most out kind of crazy countries. It's like become this kind of beautiful kind of web that's just kind of gone around the world and really become ingrained in the culture. I mean, John Williams came up through that. There are people who made their names in different parts of the music industry. Quincy Jones is kind of the obvious, but he was a jazz trumpet player, and then to go from that to,
sure.
Thriller, I'm like, what?
Yeah, it's funny. So I discovered jazz really through hip hop.
Right. Yeah.
From sampling, and then and I was at UCLA and I took a jazz class from Gerald Wilson.
Oh, nice.
Who was changed my life, right? But
love it.
But you had to listen to a lot of jazz in that class, and so I was listening to 88.1, the community station here in LA that plays jazz, and going out to see shows. And I remember just being amazed, because that's like old man jazz, right? That's straight ahead,
right?
And I remember being amazed by the idea that at one point this was subversive, controversial music,
right?
And like
so subversive,
yeah. And that's crazy, right? That Jerry Mulligan, or forget about the Way Out, the Monks and the Pharoah Sanders, but just like stuff that is really, that you hear, in Macy's,
right?
At the Christmas season now, is like, that was rebel music.
Yeah, man, activism, absolutely. I mean, that's my favorite period in American acoustic jazz, is like 62 to 67.
Yeah.
And, not growing up in this country and not knowing I knew the broad brushstrokes of the history, but now, understanding the dates more and the timelines and stuff. It's amazing thinking what Black America was going through that time.
Sure. And
the music was just so powerful and so, potently ingrained with resistance and activism. And like you say, now it's playing at the restaurant while you have dinner.
Yeah, totally. But that's the thing. And now we've lived long enough that 90s hip hop is playing in the restaurant when we have dinner.
For real.
Right?
Yeah.
And I never thought that would happen. I remember, there was places we used to go specifically because, there was a Thai place in Hollywood that played hip hop, and we're like, this is the craziest thing.
Wow.
It's unimaginable.
Totally. But I think it's interesting with the idea of jazz as social music, that, it's obviously so in the conversation now, where, being Black in America is an act of resistance.
Right.
You know, like, you know, succeeding being Black in America is activism, and like,
Sure.
you know, that's the same thing we're talking about, right? But now I guess with the luxury of being able to look at history and have the conversation as accessible as it is now, we can really see that it's, wow, that, you know, what jazz was expressing then, that was just one, you know, one sub corner of the entire expression.
Sure. Yeah.
That's now come into a much broader conversation. So that's pretty amazing. You know? Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about, you know, you kind of make music for yourself. And I saw you having a conversation on Twitter about how do you find your audience?
Yeah.
So let me turn that back on you. How do you find your audience?
I am very grateful. It's not lost on me at all. I'm grateful to have debuted on a major label before the digital culture happened. You know, I had a record signed to Universal in the UK, and it came out in 2000. And, you know, back then we still had compilations and, you know,
Right.
and I had a really great A&R and great team. It was funny. The only country that didn't release it domestically was actually America. Canada did and Brazil did, but anyway. But that, you know, that got me touring. It got me a bit like a baseline, a base level kind of audience, and it gave me enough to sustain off as far as, you know, being a touring artist and doing more records, doing more work. I've been super diligent with that. Like, the number of albums is a bit stupid now. It's like, you know, 20 albums in 20 years, you know, without counting remixes and collabs and little things.
Sure.
And I hoped, I would like to think through that I'm kind of breadcrumbing it for an audience to come with me, and then for new people to come on board and be able to go backwards and forwards. I asked it on Twitter because actually someone DM'd me and kind of bemoaning, like, man, no one even likes good music anymore. And this is a common conversation, right? I'm sure sure our parents had it, our grandparents had it, our great grandparents had it.
Forever.
No one likes good music anymore.
Right.
But so he hits me up, and I was just chatting with him, and I checked his, you know, followed his links and had to listen to his music, and this guy had a fucking incredibly produced, like, a gospel song, which is like an underground breakbeat fucking electronic jazz thing. It was
Wow.
mental. And I have no idea who he is. No one knows who he is. So he's like, man, you know, what do I do? And so I was talking to him about the three things I tweeted about, which were, you know, partnering with a label who can, you know, give you some weight, and then building community. Like, without community to amplify your music, it's not there. And collaborate, you know, work with people who inspire you and who you inspire. And to me, it's probably that simple. I don't kind of analyze I don't strategize my music in that way.
Right.
But by default, if I look back, that's always what it is. There's collaboration, community, and label partnerships. And I can look at any record and think, and, you know, that record, I thought it could do better. And I can look at what aspect of that kind of formula, usually it's the label, I can look at that and be like, oh, if that was different, then yeah.
Right.
You know, I have complete faith in the music like that. And I hope the audience has kind of stayed following, but at the same time, when I'm talking about a kind of an international record career that started in 2000, all those people are now 20 years older.
Sure.
And, you know, I think we know kind of through scientific research that the brain kind of calcifies in its new taste department at a certain, for a majority of people. So there's a certain age when you're no longer really consuming new stuff that lands in the way it did when you were 25.
Right.
And so I know that if I was just surviving off that original audience, that's kind of a losing game.
Sure.
So, you know, I try and stay connected with musicians and community and industry. And with musicians, you know, in a pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID world, then pretty much, you know, most of my collaborators in LA are younger than me. There was one band that they asked me to play keys in it, and I realized, I was like, wait, I'm the old dude in the band. And that had never happened. I was like I was like probably 43 then or something. I was like, what?
We all get to that point.
Right. But that's, you know, I love that kind of, that playbook has been laid out by a lot of people. You know, Miles did that. He always had a young band. Right. Betty Carter always had a young band. Art Blakey always had a young band.
Sure.
And I think the nature of jazz, where it feeds through the sense of individual improvisation contributing to a social conversation on the bandstand, I think the way that the intergenerationality of it is very two-way. Mm-hmm. And that's possibly, I haven't thought about this before, saying it right now, so it's a bit hairy, but that's possibly more potent than regular conversation. Like intergenerational conversation is not easy in the real world. Like,
sure,
you know, some people be like, no, my dad's cool. But what if you talk to someone else's grandfather?
Right.
How's that conversation?
Yeah.
But this music form means that they could have a conversation and almost be in two different dialects, but what would meet in the middle feeds them both. Mm-hmm. And potentially create something really potently, you know, great. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. So thank you.
No, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And I love that you broke it down for that guy. I mean, I think, first of all, to me, like helping other people solve their problems is such an important workout.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know, I always think of it as, you know, it's going to the gym, right? Because it's so much harder to do it for ourselves.
100%. Yeah. And there's a sense of, you know, what am I contributing to the world?
Right.
In that, you know, like I have a teenage son, and so I see the kind of biological continuation of me, even though it's completely him. Mm-hmm. But as far as my life's work professionally in music, it's like, okay, so I'm leaving some streaming MP3s in the universe, but what am I contributing? And so I feel like that's really something to honor, whereas, you know, as one progresses to becoming an elder in an industry, that by, you know, supporting and sharing with and lifting up the youngers, that the elder lives forever, you know? It's like,
absolutely.
And those ideas get passed on and transformed through the person you help, and usually made better. So it's like, you know, if you can't break the chain, basically, you know? Right. It's like, you got to be part of that process for the world to get better.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I also think, so, you know, you've had church, you know, as a live night for many years, and I think that's a contribution. Like, I think, you know, that's the kind of night that people remember for the rest of their lives.
That's special to hear someone say that. I mean, if someone does, that's priceless, man.
Well, you know, you go back, you know, you were talking about community, right? I think and you know, look, I've been to thousands of clubs, and you know, on some level they're all good. And, you know, just hearing a dude play records and, you know, having some nice drinks is like fine.
Yeah.
But I think what you were doing was special, right? Between, you know, the live music and the records and the sense of community and the experience that people are sharing, you know, and I think of it, you know, along the nights that I had at Brass or Giant Step or Body and Soul or Firecracker, or, you know, there's this great lineage of nights out that are meaningful, and that you carry those memories, you know, with you as you move on. I'm curious, you know, that's, I'm sure, a void now with the pandemic, maybe for you, but
Sure.
certainly for your audience, your community. What do you do? Is there any, do you just have to wait that out? How much are you thinking about, live streaming and some of that,
Sure.
some of the virtual stuff?
Yeah, I have definitely jumped on board. March the 12th, I was driving up to San Fran to play at SF Jazz with my friend Haley Nicewanger with her band. And so she was in the car and her girlfriend, and we're driving up, and we knew that Gavin Newsom was about to talk, so we had the radio on. And so we're maybe 1 hour out from San Fran from the gig that night, and the governor shuts it all down, right?
Sure.
So, and we're playing Oakland, we're doing church in Oakland the next night, obviously gone. And we just pulled over the side of the road, sparked up a joint, and just watched our calendars just fucking empty out.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's stating the obvious at this point, but that also happened. That might have been the first industry to go. Like it happened just like that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like everyone had a whole year planned out, gone.
Right.
So we spent the year, that weekend chilling up at a friend's place in Oakland, which is great, just decompress from the shock. And then I decided that, okay, touring is never coming back. And I don't know how much I believe that in my heart, but that's what I definitely said to myself. Touring's never coming back, so everything is different now. And so I made sure I was open straight away. And I've been talking with a organization called Initiatives of Change based in Richmond. They were doing this project where they were going to take me to Hiroshima to meet with atomic bomb survivors and hear their stories and then present new music work inspired by that. Amazing fucking projects. And I was 100% in. And then the pandemic hit, so that was canceled. And they, not knowing when anything would change, they pivoted really quick and they said, we want to use the same budget and do an online festival. So they did this thing called La Ceiba Festival and brought me on as the founding artist in residence, and I helped curate some stuff and I remix artists each month. And but for that, I had to learn live streaming like immediately, basically. So that was cool to like get the basic knowledge down. And then I've been wanting to start a Patreon. And I never did, because I felt like, how can I promise monthly anything if I never know where I am?
Right.
And so now I'm like, okay, well, if there's no touring, I'm nowhere. So I'm here, so I can commit to monthlies. So I started the Patreon at what arguably is probably the worst time in history to start a Patreon as far as society goes.
Maybe, yeah. Although it's understandable.
It's totally understandable, of course.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a different conversation, but I find it really interesting that OnlyFans is everyone understands how it works, but no one understands how Patreon works, and they're the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But so one thing I do on the Patreon is each month we do a community Zoom where everyone brings along a piece of music they're inspired by. And so we listen to the music together and we talk about it. And there's a whole lot of other shit I do on it, but that really has shown me the depth of community that can be achieved online. Because these are like, they're kind of candid conversations about a piece of music but it's also a little catch up, and familiarity grows month to month. And it's interesting because as far as the audience experience goes, all I can compare that to is the person who comes up to me at the end of a gig and is like, oh, hi, man, that was awesome. And we say a quick hi. But there's not much substance to that conversation. It's an exchange of gratitude and appreciation. And I totally appreciate that. And it's nice. It's really nice to hear that the experience connects with someone. But doing this with the Zoom, it's a whole different thing. Like,
yeah, sure. And
that's the most community I've ever felt with audience in my entire career. So that's interesting to me.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then one guy will be in Argentina, one's in Finland or wherever, some in the States, and it's cool.
So I love that your instant response was touring's never coming back. And I'm serious. And here's why. Because most of the world in that moment was telling themselves it's not going to be that bad.
It'll be fine by June.
Totally. Or, I was working with a company and they like everybody, they announced we're going to shut down for 2 weeks. Right? Or, shut our door. Everyone worked from home for 2 weeks. And then it was like, oh, no, 2 more weeks. Oh, no, 3 more months, right? Like, and we have this incremental approach to bad news where, and I think there's a lot of human nature in that we want to feel comfort. We want to be able to say everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And totally understandable, of course. But I think we do ourselves a disservice, right? When we sugarcoat things and when we we consciously underestimate the impact. And I always think like we'd be much better off as a society had we done what you did, right? Had we gone, oh, we're fucked. Now let's figure out what to do.
Right.
Right. Because it opens up, because if you can let go of clinging on to comfort, then you can actually get creative and you can think about solutions.
Yeah.
And so, and that's what you've done. Like, and you've come up with something that arguably, doesn't replace what you were doing before, but you've come up with something that you couldn't have created.
Absolutely.
Before.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And also like, I never, almost never ever would set up my live rig at home or in the studio because it's always going out.
Yeah. So
I broke it down the other day because I had to move house. That's the first time it's got broken down since March. But that's been really cool too, because it's like, it's always like the physicality of it slightly changes depending on the size of the stage or the whatever. But to really be getting into it in a set way has been fun. And being off the road has been so good.
I bet.
I mean, like literally, I carry maybe 150 pounds or more of shit around with me, including my own luggage.
Yeah.
And then sitting up night after night, packing down, economy class, whatever, just cramped up, not sleeping.
Sure.
And I enjoy all that, like honestly.
Yeah.
But this year I've had a back issue. Finally got an MRI. It's a herniated disc.
Ugh.
And it's getting better, which is great. But just I'm imagining, fuck, I have a herniated disc. What if I've been touring all year? Like,
right. Yeah.
Nah, this is perfect timing for a little break.
For sure. So back to that moment, that feeling. Yeah. Is that just are you always that way? Is that a personality trait? Or was that a unique? I mean, it's a unique situation.
I mean, the one thing I can look at, which is not comparative, but I've moved country a number of times, and every time I've left something professional behind that I've built. So like in New Zealand, in Auckland, there was this underground wine cellar jazz club that I put together, and I booked it. I played there a lot. I felt like the culture of what we'd done was built around what I had around my contribution. And so in leaving New Zealand and choosing to move to the UK, I'm thinking, well, but I'm scared to leave that. Like, what's going to happen? And so I had to learn very quickly how to give it to someone else and then let go of it emotionally, because they're not going to do what I would have done with it. And then in London, there was something similar, and I just finished it. I was like, cool, that's done. And so maybe those kinds of things kind of coupled with the actual physical moving country, starting a new life, maybe there's a sense of compartmentalizing attachment or something. Not to sound too cold and calculating.
Look, I mean, I think I think one of the biggest challenges to success creatively and in business is the inability to let go.
Oh my God, yeah. And I suffer from that in different ways, absolutely, you know, but seemingly in this one way we're talking about, it's not an issue. Because
you got to take what you can get.
Yeah, and I, you know, it was a great lesson too in when you create white space that things do actually come in. Like things are fucking waiting to come in, and they're just like, man, when were you gonna free up some time?
Yeah, sure.
So that's cool.
That's amazing.
And you know, I still don't think touring's coming back like for a long time. Not the way I was doing it, like a different country every night. Nah.
Yeah, I don't either. I think it's a long ways away.
Over.
And so I have to ask you, you know, on that note, there was another thing I saw on Twitter, you know, in response to the announcement about Save Live, Mark Geiger's new company, where he's going to go buy up a bunch of venues.
I don't know. I don't know the dude, but it doesn't bode well to me.
So, well, you know, look, for anyone who doesn't know, he's a big music agent. You know, one of the top agents in the business, just left, starting his own thing. He's got a bunch of other people's money, and he's got $75 million fund to go buy up music venues. And he's named the company Save Live, which I think is a bit of good branding. And so, you know, here's the thing. I'm not going to really take a position on it. I think that the industry and fans are looking for a solution that enables us to enjoy live music in the future.
Absolutely, no question about it.
And the artists, right? Artists obviously need venues to perform at.
Yes.
So, you know, this is his swing at a problem that we all, you know, share or care about, and it's going to benefit him maybe more than anyone else. So, you know, and on some, you know, on paper, that's good business, right? There's what you would call distressed assets out there, and you can go buy things cheap and save the businesses, whatever that means, take a piece for yourself, and, you know, whatever. So, but I get, you know, I get the reaction, and it wasn't just you. I saw, you know, people on the feed, you know, sharing a lot of skepticism about, you know, motives and you know, what I assume like what it's actually going to mean for these venues.
Yeah.
What should happen?
Well, I think I don't believe he's an altruist, and I say that because the press coverage of it maintains that he'll have a 51% share in every venue. Right. Now, if he was like, I'm going to invest in you like for negative interest basically and give you a whole chunk of change, and I'm going to take 20% of your company, I'd be like, that is a good dude.
Sure.
And a clever businessman who believes it's money to make him music. But if he's taking 51% controlling interest, I think he's just trying to fucking gut things. But I'm not taking a stance on it either. But
when I say, I mean, I don't know what the right answer is. Yes, I mean, you could.
Who knows what the right answer? But I think if we take him out of the picture for a second, there's a massive fucking problem. I mean, we have venues that have been closed for 7 months that still won't be reopening for at least the rest of the year, if not, well, actually definitely longer. Yeah. I haven't spoken to many venue owners, but one venue I've spoken to, I know that they basically stopped paying rent when the pandemic started.
Sure.
And and they try and negotiate a rent break or a lower break or something, and the landlord wants full rent. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to presume that is possibly a scenario that's happening to a lot of venues.
I'm sure it is.
So you're talking about spaces, and we're not talking about the Staples Center or we're talking about spaces which are founded on passion and a labor of love that probably lose money most nights. And when they have a great night, that just covers the losses. It's a break-even fucking business. It's not like they have $100,000 sitting in the bank account in case it's a pandemic. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think the choice at that point for a lot of people must be, am I going to walk away, or am I going to take this money and lose control of this, but have it live?
Sure. And
that's a really hard decision. Like I kind of favor, and it's the purest in me, I kind of favor walking away. It was like, you know, declare the company bankrupt, and a new ecosystem will grow where the old ecosystem was. Mm-hmm. I mean, that hurts me from a nostalgic point of view. Like venues I love and love playing, and knowing already that some of them will disappear, because it's not like Mark Geiger's going to bail out every venue.
Right, of course.
So yeah, a lot of will disappear. But what's wrong with some change, like some foundational change? Like the music industry was fucking broken before COVID.
Yeah.
You know, most touring musicians, pretty much across genres, in most kind of tiers, there are exceptions, of course, but most are earning the same dollar figure they would have been earning 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. You know, inflation hasn't stopped. You know, everything's more expensive. The dollar value is worth less, but you're getting the same number of units 20 years later.
Right.
And that's not even looking at, you know, Spotify and whatever else. It's just, it's fucked, man. So yeah, I think there's some really hardcore change that needs to happen. I don't feel well informed enough to be like, this is what it should be, but I do feel like this is an opportunity for there to be fundamental changes. I mean, that the DMCA, that was the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. That was put into law before YouTube even existed.
Right.
Before
Google
that was
really
existed.
in response
It was like
to
Napster, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, when, you know, there's some foundation that the foundations are not built. So whether it reopens, if it reopens in the same way it was, I'm kind of like, I'm seeing it in a different way now, having had a break. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do want to tour, but not like I was before.
Sure.
I would like to tour the things I really want to play, where I want to go, at a level of comfort that I feel I've earned.
Yeah. Well, you know, look, you'd like to think that we can come out of this smarter and stronger, you know, maybe a bit leaner, mm-hmm. you know, having figured some things out. That's, you know, that's my optimistic side. You know, again, kind of what we were talking about before. I think there's a lot of pressure to not change.
Totally.
And just think this thing, you know, wait for it to be over and then try to go back to, you know, the way it was before, which is not realistic, but, you know, who knows? Everyone's going to handle it a little bit differently.
For real. I hope that the musicians, kind of, you know, jobbing musicians from before, like I know a lot of my kind of extended community are kind of just waiting for it to come back and waiting for it to be over. And I do kind of, I feel for them. Like, I feel like proactiveness, like this is really, and proactiveness can be a state of mind. You know, it doesn't actually have to mean a whole plan, like a game book. But
sure.
Yeah, I think that's our biggest opportunity right now, is we have the opportunity to be, you know, mentally proactive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's next for you? What are you excited about?
What am I excited about? We just dropped a trio record, which was fun, called Dreamweavers. It was my first time doing a trio record since 1996. And first time I let someone else produce a record as well. So that was kind of interesting.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So that's there. And there's a whole lot of remixes and little productions I've done over the last few months coming out. A lot for Boomerang Records, UK label. It's my first time working with them. So there's that, and then there's, what else is happening? It's always more. There's a couple of albums in the can.
Okay.
So I'm talking to labels about these two albums, which are two different projects. One of them is a trio with Shigeru and Melanie Charles. Shigeru is a producer from Detroit. He's a super dope drummer, and Melanie fucks with the SP sampler and flute and sings, and so that's a crazy little unit. But yeah, so, you know, new projects kind of well, those are almost old projects now because the way the cycle goes, you record it, it kind of sits in the can till the business is right.
Yeah.
I have fantasies of making my own idea of an ambient meets piano album.
Okay.
And that's, I've kind of started experimenting with that a little bit. I'm not quite sure it's there yet. So that'll be nice, some kind of introspective vibe. And then I was lucky to get awarded a fellowship, which covers me to go to Japan for 3 months to do a project there.
Nice.
Which is supposed to start in March.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
But, I don't know if we'll be able to travel from America to Japan by March. But that's super cool. It's like my dad.
I mean, if you're staying 3 months and you can quarantine or whatever,
if they let you in the door in the first place, totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, my dad did. I mentioned earlier he lived there for 20 years, from like 53 to 73. And when he was dying, he wrote his memoir. And his memoir, it really details his 20 years in Japan.
Cool.
So this fellowship project is for me to go to Japan and basically use his memoir as a guidebook and retrace his path.
Wow.
And then create new work from that inspiration. So
that sounds amazing.
Super excited by that. That's like, yeah, I just need to be able to go there.
For sure.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, I got to get to a lightning round before I let you get back to it.
Yeah, man.
What's your favorite city to travel to?
Kyoto.
Such a great place.
It's so beautiful. It used to be Tokyo, but I spent more time in Kyoto recently, and it's just it's a vibe. All the rivers running through it and stuff. Yeah, good people, good food. Yeah.
Nice. Who's your favorite DJ?
Oh, I don't know if I can lightning this one. I give it to Spinner.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, DJ Spinner, and that was a close call, tied with 100 other people. So,
what's the last great book you read?
The last great book I read was actually Kindred, Octavia Butler. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, but I had never read Octavia Butler, and people have been saying for years, "Oh, you got to check her out," and so. Kindred was my first one, and it just blew my mind. I hadn't read a fiction page turner like that in maybe a decade.
Nice.
So yeah, great. Especially in these times, her work is quite prophetic.
Sure. Yeah, that's cool. What movie have you seen the most in your life?
Ooh, what a great question. Probably the first Star Wars movie.
Okay.
Yeah, we used to have in the 80s at home, we had a little 8mm home camera thing, and my parents had put up a sheet and project stuff there. And then my dad was always traveling to Asia, so he'd find these like bootleg this and that. So we had 8mm of Star Wars. And
wow!
And the Jetsons.
That's fun.
I think those two. So I haven't seen the Jetsons much since then, but definitely having raised a child, we definitely did Star Wars. So yeah, I'd probably say that one.
Nice.
Yeah.
Name someone you haven't met who has taught you the most.
Wow. Okay, there'd be so many of these people in my life. But I would say Miles Davis. Yeah, I'm a massive fan and student of his music, which goes without question.
Sure.
But the way he specifically kept changing, almost every record was like a reincarnation.
Yeah.
To the point where he would put out music that his fans would be like, "What the fuck is this? I like the last record." And then by the time he puts out the next record, they get hip to the previous record, and now they're like, "Well, what the fuck is this?"
Sure.
And so there's a constant evolution in what he did. And he also, if there's like a Jesse Owens of trumpet, it wasn't him. He's not like the perfect trumpet player.
Yeah.
And I love that. There's so much life and personality and persona in the idiosyncrasies of or the imperfections of his playing. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of set as the stone in the setting of his bands, where he'd keep changing bands with new young players, different style players. And then if you listen to him on like his last record, the posthumous one, say Doo-Bop, mm-hmm. and you compare that to something he did in the 40s for Prestige, he's playing the same way. Like his playing didn't really change, but he had the vision to kind of create around it what would create the change. Also he could not be playing, and it was his record. Like he could play one note 40 minutes later, but the whole thing is like, his energy would pull these other musicians to a focus point, which they can't have without him being in the room.
Yeah,
that shit's
incredible.
Deep. Yeah.
Sure. Is there one Miles record that you go to more than the rest?
Probably. I mean, my first one was, I think it was 1961, live in Carnegie Hall. Mm-hmm. It's called My Funny Valentine and Four and More. It's a double album. That was the first one I heard. And the first time I heard Herbie, actually that band, it's Herbie, Ron Carter, Tony Williams, George Coleman on sax. But yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia in that for me. And then the way the rhythm section and Herbie particularly, the way Herbie plays, I was laughing about this to a friend recently. So Herbie Hancock was 21 years old when this concert was recorded in Carnegie Hall. It was a live gig, not a studio date. He's 21. And now there's still, like, piano players are still trying to reach that level of kind of connectivity and creativity. And he did it like when he was 21 years old in 1961. It's like,
amazing.
What?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of those guys, for anybody, I don't care if you're a jazz fan or not, but both of their autobiographies
oh my God, yeah,
are incredible. The Herbie one and the Miles one. I just
Mm-hmm.
read Miles earlier this year.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
I mean, you take it with a couple of bags of salt, but it's hilarious.
Yeah, for sure.
I love it, man. I love it.
Hey, last question. If I worked for you, what's something I would hear you say over and over?
I love these questions. Probably something like, that's great, but what if we tried to do it like this?
Yeah, I think I would expect that. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because that's definitely euphemistic compared to how I was when I was younger.
Sure.
But it's interesting now getting to a point where I'm very open to that being brought to me as well, and that's been a learning curve. But I think, life gets us there when it gets us there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, man, I really appreciate this conversation. It was so much fun.
Yeah, man, really enjoyed talking with you too.
Love to do it again sometime. And I want to encourage everybody, first of all, anyone who hasn't seen the live remixing stuff that you do, that's a real treat. It's amazing, and everyone should check out the Patreon. Sounds like amazing things happening on Patreon. So I want to encourage everybody to get down with that.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the support and really fun conversation.
Nice.
Yeah, man.
That was Mark de Clive-Lowe on Rebel Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Leave us a comment. Hit us on Twitter or Facebook. It's at Rebel Radio Net. You can find videos of a lot of our episodes on our YouTube channel. And most importantly, come back next week for more Rebel Radio. Peace.